Right. Good afternoon or good morning, good evening, everyone, depending where you are joining us today. And welcome to this event organized by GSMA on responsible leadership in the digital world. So responsible leadership and trust are topics that are quite close to the GSMA heart and to the mobile industry. And about almost 2 years ago now, we launched a set of principles by the GSMA board, but also by a bigger number of CEOs across the digital ecosystem. We had 40 CEOs support this movement in 2019, and now we have over 80 CEOs who've joined the Digital Declaration. And really the vision behind it was to show that private sector leadership, but also commitment, is really essential to drive trust from consumers, but also to ensure that digital services and the digital economy is done in an inclusive way, and that really everyone across society can benefit from digital innovation. Of course, I mean, this year, when we look at how people have shifted their life online and have relied heavily on digital infrastructure, on mobile services, on wider internet services, this has accelerated the path of digitalization. And while this is presenting a lot of opportunities for growth, for recovery, it's also really important that this goes hand in hand with digital confidence. So today you will hear from some of the companies who have signed up to the Digital Declaration and really about how they are putting into practice some of these principles in the way they conduct business, whether it's around innovation, inclusion. And you can find some of these as well in a report that we are launching today together with Edelman. And Edelman is joining us as well for a panel discussion, which we'll talk a little bit more in the second part of the event. So before we move to our panel, I would like to kick the event to invite John Giusti, who is the Chief Regulatory Officer of the GSMA, and Andrew Wickhoff, who is Director for Science, Technology and Innovation at the OECD, for a bit of a fireside chat on the topic of responsible leadership and how trust is really important to foster innovation in this digital age. So, John, I will hand over to you and to Andrew.
Thank you so much, Alix. It has been pointed out that I don't have a fire for the fireside, but it's still a great pleasure for me to welcome Andrew Wickhoff today, Director of the OECD's Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation. Andrew oversees the OECD's work on innovation, business dynamics, science and technology, information and communication technology policy, and importantly, the statistical work associated with each of these areas. The OECD is an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives, including finding evidence-based solutions to a range of social, economic, and environmental challenges. And Andrew very much exemplifies the OECD's leadership in these areas and was a key contributor to the report that Alix just referenced, really helping to shed light on the way that both the public and the private sectors can contribute to extending consumer trust in the digital age. So Andrew, consumer trust really is key here as we move into the increasingly digital. Why is that from your perspective? What about the digital world has really brought this to the forefront?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this broadcast and for asking that question. I've had the luxury of my career of watching really the digital economy come from what was a kind of a boutique issue to now center stage, and I think COVID pushes it even further. And I guess I would just say I remember the early days of e-commerce where it was struggling, and it was exactly these trust issues that were foremost at mind. Human beings have senses. We hear, we see, we smell, and it's with that we draw an image of trust about something or distrust, and we should flee. And if you just think about the retail experience, so much of what happens when we walk into a store is about the look and feel of the store, the face of the merchant, the brand that all convey trust. And many of these signals are missing in the virtual world, especially when the transaction occurs at a distance or increasingly across borders. And in many ways, e-commerce is the easy case here. And clever, innovative firms have figured this out through ratings from consumers, comments, and again, building that brand, chat box, and so forth have all, I think, helped to convey that trust in a digital world. And it gets even more complex as our current world, where we have apps on our phones and tools which are pretty much black boxes to most of us. We don't know how they work, and now with the advent of algorithmically driven processes, best exemplified by machine learning and AI, I think the distance may come even wider between us and the technology. And as the autonomy of the app increases, the agency of the human begins to fade. And when you combine this with kind of well-publicized attacks and fraud scams, trust is eroded. And we're just about to make another big leap towards the Internet of Things, where the adoption of sensors and activators in physical devices that can have a real safety impact. And that's yet again another step up on trust. So I think this is the issue. Digital natives, even those of us who a little bit beyond our 30s, are increasingly comfortable with it, but not 100%. And I think that's the trust issue that you refer to, John.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And taking the vantage point that you have, engaging business globally and certainly across the key economies represented within the OECD membership, what can or should businesses be doing to fortify and extend that consumer trust?
Yeah, again, it's an incredibly dynamic, innovative market space. And so you've seen a lot of innovations, both of a hardware type and a business model and a software type, come to the fore to address this issue. Certainly encryption. I remember when this was just embarking, but that has been instrumental, I think, in helping build that trust. User-friendly interfaces and innovations like, as I said, comments coming from users have been helpful too. Even big data is pretty instrumental in, I think, helping us certify who we think we are dealing with is actually the person or the entity that we're dealing with, as well as being used to detect fraud and protect us from things like malicious software. What's difficult here is finding the right balance between using data and other technologies to build that trust and not have it erode trust. And so here's where we worry about the disproportionate collection of data, which can also open up vulnerabilities if it's breached. And then there's a question of not knowing what's happening to your data. And that's why I'm a fan of your digital declaration that begins to deal with some of these issues and point to the importance of trust. I guess I would just end by saying, there's new things coming online, security labels, as I said, clear disclosure about how the use of data and micro-targeting with this data, and then providing consumers really a means for a redress should something happen. And increasingly, and this is where the OECD is, this redress has to occur across borders, where not always do the sovereign laws match up. And that's where we need to work on interoperability and international agreements to really make this flow. But again, COVID, I think, has shown it's very close, but it's also provided a bit of a stress test on areas where that need fixing.
No, thank you about that. And I think we've been talking a bit about sort of the business perspective here, obviously, referencing the role that governments might play in cross-border agreements. And I think I would like to touch a little bit here on the public sector, because it clearly does have an important role to play as well. And this year, as you've said, we've confronted the impact of the global pandemic. We've really seen, like never before, the importance of connectivity and digital technologies to address some of the biggest challenges, whether it be economic or social. So what trends do you see emerging from this experience? And in particular, how do you engage with governments to ensure that public policies provide that right level of protection, so in areas such as data privacy or ethics, while making sure not to stifle innovation? So it's always that important question we confront.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I guess I would again first just say that GSMA, more than most places, just can see how the networks have been remarkably resilient and have scaled up to handle what was really a huge surge in demand. By some of our estimates, 60% increase in the load that they're carrying in terms of data. And what that data symbolizes is that's kept our economies and our societies going. So we haven't come to a complete halt, but rather economic activity and just meeting up with friends and family has been able to happen thanks to those networks. And so an immediate public policy issue in my mind is recognizing the importance of those networks, how investment needs to occur, how we need to fill in the white spots where people don't have adequate coverage, and maybe a rethinking of what is adequate coverage in this era, because I just don't think the old connectivity is going to be sufficient. We need higher speed broadband connections that can enable some of these applications. With this, as we were just talking about in a second, is a really, I think, renewed sense of importance to the issues of privacy and digital security. A lot is made of differences across the Atlantic at the table that I sit at. I actually think COVID is beginning to narrow these, and I think this is an awakening and an opportunity for those countries to come together and look at what's working well and build on enormous amounts of agreement, and then begin to slowly pick off some of the remaining issues that exist. And I think your whole concept here was encapsulated in last year's G20 under the presidency of Japan, where Prime Minister Abe coined the term kind of data-free flows with trust. And so that's really the bringing together two different communities who haven't talked to each other always. And one is the trade negotiators, the data-free flow people, and then the trust people, who tend to be people working on data protection authorities and others. And I think this is helpful. We're seeing, I'll just end in a second, we're seeing policies develop that begin to take a more holistic view of this and its role in the economy and balancing different issues. And we're trying to encourage that at the OECD, where we're going to start up a huge project in 21-22 looking at data governance more specifically.
So, with obviously these continuing, evolving, emerging digital technologies, they're very much continuing to fuel the transformation that we're seeing. And our experience from the mobile ecosystem has really been that the degree to which policy can keep up with technology is a challenge. So very much a flexible regulatory environment is crucial for driving those initial deployments, the adoption and scale. And that's very much why we really premise this digital declaration on a set of principles. Now, in the report with Edelman, you talk about the advantage of principles over rules and regulations. But I was curious your perspective on that and a bit about the balance that needs to be struck in your view.
Yeah, and again, I applaud GSMA's role here, and particularly encouraging so many businesses to sign on to your declaration, which has these aspirational principles. And we've started to use principles at the OECD ourselves. One of them is our AI principles, which were converted into what's called a council recommendation, which is the highest level recommendation at the OECD, kind of the equivalent of soft law last year. And now we've got 50 countries adhering to them. And the reason I like principles is for exactly the reason you said. This is a quickly evolving environment. There are innovations coming that can help resolve some of the problems or at least reduce them. And if you get too specific regulations, some of those innovations may not occur. So what I like about principles is they provide a guidepost directing us towards shared outcomes that we all want to achieve. And it's almost like lines on the road that keep you in your lane, safe, going in the right direction, but without dictating how many wheels the vehicle must have, which is we leave up to innovation. And we're beginning to see it in places like AI, where the data requirements are Herculean for machine learning, and with that comes some privacy issues. But we're beginning to see innovative techniques like the use of synthetic data to train AI systems. And the synthetic data may help to weed out some of the biases that come in our normal data. But I do think, I don't want to go too far here with principles. There is areas where we do need specific regulations or enforcement mechanism, and these include things such as protecting critical information infrastructure, ensuring transparency and disclosure of practices, particularly in the areas like privacy or consumer protection.
So thank you for that perspective, Andrew. I think really that metaphor of the lanes and the guidance, as well as that sort of balance that needs to be struck in this very complex area, is really sort of important for us to consider in today's session. We could obviously talk for hours on all of these topics, but given our time limitations, as a final question to you, if you could say one key thing in your view that is required to bring about more equitable, sustainable, and inclusive growth in the digital age, what would that be?
So, John, I will be quick because I don't want to hold up the esteemed panel that's just about to follow. Three quick things. The first is, number one is equipping people with the right skills so they can make informed choices. And these aren't just STEM skills. It's a whole set of digital literacy that goes beyond that. Number two is we really have to make sure that the marketplace works. And this will require transparency and adequate disclosure of practices, as well as protecting against unfair competition practices. And this may be more than just competition policy. It may be an ecosystem of policies, including things like innovation policy and what many are calling the new industrial policy. And number three is the upgrading to our tax system, be fit for purpose for the digital era, since many of our policies, including tax, are really a legacy of a tangible era where industries like autos were emblematic of the economy. That's no longer the case. And we need that revenue coming in to support government functions that add to equitable and inclusive growth.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I think those 3 points really set the stage well, I think, for the next panel. I really want to thank you again for joining us, for sharing your insights with all of us in the session today. And now, Alix, I hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Right. Yes. Thank you, John. And thank you, Andrew, as well. I think that was a perfect way to set the scene before we move to the panel discussion. The digital declaration, we talked about that, but really has three main pillars. And it's about trust. Andrew talked about, ensuring data protection, privacy, so people feel comfortable using digital services. It's about inclusion, so ensuring that the digital future can be equitable for everyone. And it's also about ensuring there is an environment which is fit for innovation, so the private sector can continue to innovate. So I know our panelists will touch upon those different aspects, and I'd like to invite Gerry Wisniewski, who's the Managing Director from Edelman in the UK, to join me because she'll be moderating the panel discussion next. Thank you, Gerry.
Thank you, and good afternoon, all. Thank you for your time this afternoon. So we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes or so talking to our esteemed guests about what responsible business leadership looks like in a rapidly changing world. We're not just going to talk about why, but we're going to get into the what. So what does responsible business leadership look like in practice too? So firstly, just some brief introductions. Myself, I'm Gerry Wisniewski. I'm the MD of Edelman. We're a global communications firm. We are known for 20 years of data and study into the dynamics of trust between organisations and publics. And what we've seen this year in our study, which gets launched at Davos each year, is that trust in organisations, business, government, media, NGOs has risen to really record levels as people are looking towards all these organisations for answers. So it's a really interesting time to see how that focus will shift, particularly when we're looking to reopen economies again. I would also like to introduce some others on the call, and I'm hoping we can see them here. Harmeen Mehta, who is the Global Chief Information Officer at Airtel. We have Michaël Trabbia, who is the Chief Technology Officer and Innovation Officer at Orange. Torod Neptune, who is the VP Worldwide Communications and Chief Communications Officer for Lenovo. So I'm sure you'll agree we've got some fantastic voices here today to go deeper on this topic. So before we get into the detail of the discussion, I wanted to remind everyone there's an opportunity to ask questions in the chat. Towards the end of the discussion, we will be monitoring there, so please feel free to do so, and hopefully we've got some time to cover those at the end. But first, the first pillar of the digital declaration is all about trust. And it outlined principles that underpin responsible business leadership. And the first pillar talks about extending consumer trust for the digital age. And I'm going to ask Harmeen to step in here and firstly introduce herself personally. But one of the insights from the report was that responsible business leadership calls for transparency and openness. How are you at Airtel implementing this into practice? And how have these contributed in cementing consumer trust? What results have you seen? And I'll hand over to Harmeen.
Thanks, Gerry, and good afternoon, good evening to everybody wherever you are in whichever part of the world. But this has been unprecedented for the entire world. I think it's been unprecedented not only for companies but for individuals as well. I think it's not surprising that how much the world has, not only the world has changed, but how much all of us have changed during this time and adapting to different things, both at home, and that's what our customers were kind of going through as well. And I think there were quite a few things that we did that I can tell you in particular, Gerry, I was very proud of my organization, of how they stood through this kind of test of time. And I'll just name a few. One of the things is when immediately in India, the lockdown actually happened with less than 24 hours of notice. So the Prime Minister went on air and said, next few hours we're going to lock down the country and we don't know for how long. So people were not fully prepared, etc. And India is it's a huge country, 1 billion people, 1.3 billion people, but 1 billion mobile phones. And a lot of these guys, which are on the other side of the digital chasm, who are not as digitally savvy and couldn't have just gone online and done their recharges. We really saw they were, telecom was essential services for the country and essential for the government. And hence one of the biggest focus that we had as a company was, before saying that what I need to do for Airtel, it was what do I need to do to keep the country going. So that was kind of the first focus. The second came, what do I need to do to keep the company going? And I think that's how we kind of ran our entire BCP. And then the second piece, we realized that almost 80 million low-income customers of ours, they were left stranded where shops were shut down and they couldn't go and do recharges and they were not digitally savvy. So we actually continued to provide them free services for well over a month. And that when done at scale, 80 million people, it's a massive amount. But, that was one big call that was taken by the organization. Another big piece that we did was, because all of retail was shut down. So Airtel as a company in a country like India, we support over 1 million retailers whose big prime source of income is actually from selling telecom services. And all their prime sources of income had gone. The shops were shut down. So a lot of these distributors and retailers, we continued to pay their commissions or salaries, even if they were doing zero business for us, but we continued to pay them for this month of extreme lockdown as well. But the much bigger focus came in India. Almost more than 30 million people were completely displaced because they were not from their home, they were away from their hometowns, and they were in very far off cities, and they had neither they lost their jobs, or because they were really daily laborers, or those who make their money, tilling over the day, and that's what brings bread over, on their table in the evening. And I think those were another focus of us, that how to make them connected with their families. So there was a whole lot of initiative that was done to continue to not only provide them free services for a month, but also to enable for almost a 3-month period how they could continue, to remain connected with their loved ones. And we started many campaigns, and we actually encourage a lot of our customers who knew anybody like that to actually do a recharge for them. We actually started a campaign whereby a lot of people, if you were a young student or, kind of digitally savvy, you could do recharge for many people. And what I would normally pay a retailer as commission, I would pay you. So it became a secondary source of income for all of these 30 million people, where they could literally just have something to live on during these very difficult times. So I think we've, and the final thing we did was a lot of creative thinking by our sales teams, whereby the only things that were open in the country were medical shops and ATMs. So we did a tie-up with every bank in the country in a matter of 1 week. We technically built an interface that allowed recharges to happen on every ATM in the country in 4 days. So in 10 days, we actually had 250,000 ATMs across India enabled for recharges. And in the same period, we went and did a tie-up with every single medical store and pharmacy in the whole country, where we put one of our persons there outside that shop, saying anybody who came to get medicines, they could also do a recharge. So it was hustle of a lifetime during those periods, but it was a hustle for our customers as well. And I think at some level, it made all of us connect with humanity in a very different way. And I was very proud for everything, at least, that Airtel could do in that very short period of time for all its customers.
Harmeen, what wonderful stories that you've just told us there about how you've mobilized and at speed, really challenging situation. You became a sort of essential lifeline to not only consumers but businesses, and at that rapid pace, which I know lots of organizations have faced. That you made that really important point about how your role became to serve society and citizens at a really challenging time. So lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, Harmeen, in a moment, but I'm going to move on to the second pillar, which is all about inclusion in the digital declaration. So this was all about the principle of promising inclusive growth and opportunities for all. And I'm going to move on to Torod. So this year, Torod, has shown us even more that society doesn't work if it doesn't work equally for everyone. What measures have you taken to embed inclusion into Lenovo's core?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And it's a great question. I think in some ways, from our perspective, it also reinforces a little bit of the conversation we were just happening. But, globally, we operate across over 180 markets, which is significant for this question's grounding around the diversity of the cultures and publics and stakeholders in which we engage, customers and the like. And so we talk about our mission most often as an organization as this construct of smarter technology for all. And for us, that for all is a significant piece of, again, not just building new things, building manufacturing new products, but really looking at how we pull through in a very authentic way across internal and external aspects of the organization, this construct of for all. And so for us, we've done this in 3 very quick areas that I'll highlight. One is being a transparent commitment to publicly disclose what inclusion looks like across our organization internally in terms of data, on our journey to ensure that our organization, our workforce reflects our customer base, back to that 180 markets. And so we put a stake in the ground literally 2 years ago, and are about to look at this again for our 3rd year, with public benchmarks and then public data disclosure against those benchmarks across diversity, inclusion, recruitment, retention, promotion, you name it. And that, as most people will appreciate, is not an easy thing for a big organization to do. But I think to this question, embedding inclusion not just as a marketing aspiration, but as a fundamental approach to our business and the way we operate, was really manifested, I think, and in some ways reflected in this commitment to publicly share warts and all, how we're doing, both to challenge ourselves, but also use that as a mechanism to challenge our stakeholder ecosystem as well, around the kind of values and commitments that we also ultimately expect them to deliver on. The other two areas that I think are interesting examples of, again, the way we've tried to pull this through, the for all, across our organization, is obviously through our global foundation as well. And so the focus there is on underserved communities, traditionally underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. And so not just the technology, but the kinds of training, programmatic, product development kinds of work that we're doing is really designed to lean into, again, the focus on for all, right? And so not just how we sell more products to the developed world per se, but how we really think about some traditionally underrepresented stakeholder groups that we really believe have not benefited from the growth and access to technology that they should. And so that's a significant priority for us. And then the last one that I think is probably more interesting from our vantage point is product diversity office that we created in the last year or two as well, along the same lines of this public reporting. And that really is a collaboration between our D&I office, our technology and product development teams, to establish a real authority around ensuring that D&I is embedded in our product design development process. And again, back to the kinds of things that big organizations often don't do well, we also determined that if we were going to pull through this commitment to inclusion, we could not, given the sheer size of our manufacturing organization, not begin at step 1 or 2 with looking at the massive product development operation and how we ensure that the product is created, built, developed, designed by diverse people and takes into considerations these publics that we've been talking about as well. So we're quite excited about that organization that, again, is a collaboration of many teams within the company, but again, at its core has this commitment to pull through this for all to our design and development work as well, as opposed to just the back end of that, which is how we sell and grow access.
Right, you mentioned some really fascinating things there. I love you talk about, this being not just a marketing exercise, but this has to be, fundamental to the business and underpin everything that you do. I really love, the fact that you're talking about making your data, looking at the data really deeply and looking at public disclosure and making sure you're really transparent around that, but also just thinking about that in the product development, in the way that, your talent and teams are around, what's in the pipeline and how that gets distributed globally. So thank you very much, Torod. We'll also come back to you, hopefully, but we'll get to do a second round of questions on each of these pillars. But I want to move on to Michaël. So Michaël, the third pillar is about innovation. So it's all about providing an environment for continued innovation. And we've heard from Andrew Wickhoff in Fireside Chat. He said that we have a tendency to forget that innovation is the engine for productivity, which is important because productivity gains enable gains in the standard of living, which in turn allow the tackling of societal problems or issues. What does Orange do to ensure that we have an environment fit for continued innovation?
Yes, thank you, Gerry. I hope you can hear me well. Indeed, innovation is definitely key and is at the core of our DNA, by the way. I have the pleasure and the great responsibility to lead our technology and innovation team within Orange, which is about 8,000 people working from research to anticipation, innovation, and delivery. It's about 700 million euros that we put there. And we are, we are within the top 100 company referring to patents. So innovation is a core value for us. Indeed, innovation can bring a lot for our societal concern or societal commitments. And I would like maybe to take 2 examples. The first one is about digital inclusion. You have been talking about this, and this is very key for us too. For us, digital inclusion is giving access to the greater number of people to digital first. So it means coverage. And for instance, we have a lot of innovation to extend coverage in rural areas, not only in Europe, but we are present a lot in Africa, in around 20 countries in Africa, and we are designing technologies that enable us to bring extended coverage in rural areas in Africa, which is definitely something that changes the life of people. When you bring connectivity in a village, that's really allow new business opportunities, and that we can see that, and I think a lot of you, many of you here in the conference can testify about how this is critical for people. So we are looking at this with also a number of technological opportunities. We can think about our mobile network with the 3G, 4G connectivity, but also with potential new solutions, satellite solution. Sometimes also we see some players with balloons or other solutions, but the idea is the same. It's to bring more connectivity where it is not present. And the second example I would like to take is about environment, and we all, I think, are very concerned about this big societal topic, which is the environmental topic, and we have taken a lasting commitment for the planet. When our ambition at Orange is to reach carbon neutrality by 2040, which is 10 years before I would say the overall commitment that the telco industry has taken, and in line with the Paris Agreement around this. And for this, we need innovation. We need innovation because what we do to that respect is, first, we reduce our own footprint, our own environmental footprint, so the energy that we use, and we need more efficient technology. For instance, when we move from copper to fiber in the fixed access, we reduced by 10 the energy consumption that we have. When we move from the mobile to 5G, 5G will be 10 times more efficient. So that's the first topic. We need to be more efficient, to use more efficient technology. And then, and I would say above all, it's also bringing solution for the rest of the economy, for the overall industries. And here, what we can see, and that's also the GSMA that put this figure on the table, which is very valid. When 1 ton of CO2 that you use for digital allow you to save 10 tons of CO2 in other industries. And so that's why here innovation is critical, because this really allows you to bring smart city, to bring better logistic efficiency improvement for the factories. And thanks to all those use cases, we are able to save a lot of CO2 and to contribute even more to this big environmental concern than with our own, I would say, CO2 reduction.
Thank you, Michaël. That was brilliant. What I took away from that is that you're particularly looking at, some really interesting areas of innovation that will better serve people and society. I love that you talked about, extending reach to underserved areas of the world, areas, and you talked about this environmental commitment to the planet and tackling that as an innovation issue as well. So thank you so much. I have one more round of questions, and I'm really hoping that I can quickly get around to everyone and still try and keep us on time. So I'm going to go back to Harmeen now and ask her. So 81% of people say that in order to buy from a brand, they must trust the brand to do the right thing. And that's actually come from a study that Edelman's done into trust. We did a special report into trust and the coronavirus pandemic. What practical steps has Airtel taken to achieve sort of responsible conduct when it comes to data and privacy in particular? Because we know that is key. Handling that is going to be very key to building and maintaining consumer trust.
So, Gerry, we're fortunate enough. We are actually one of the top 2 most loved and trusted brands in the country across all categories. And I think we can't thank enough, to our consumers who actually are the ones who place this trust in us. And I see there are a few pivotal reasons for that. One is, I think in the history of Airtel, we've never been known to ever sell any data, any information. It's neither in our DNA nor will we ever do anything like that. We run a lot of innovation on data, but it is always for not only the betterment of our customers, but it is the innovations that we run and not something that we go out and sell like many top brands in the world who are actually built and monetized on that principle itself. And I think that is something that's greatly appreciated. And if I see globally, we're in over 20 countries, 425 million customers. We're the number 2 largest telco today. Over multi-million enterprises are on us, and I think that's the reason, the place of a lot of trust in us. The other piece that we did do during this is, we in India, of course, for example, we cover over 1 million enterprises, small, medium, large enterprises, and we, our enterprise business provides services to all of them. But we massively accelerated our entire cybersecurity business, and we got a business called Airtel Secure, and we massively accelerated that during this period. And even customers who were not part of Airtel Secure, we kind of helped them during this time, because cyber attacks across the world went up massively during COVID. In fact, they went up as much as 600%. Phishing was up 600%. Ransomware was up 250%. And DDoS attacks were also up almost 200%. So almost every country saw its main infrastructure, power, financial services, all key companies getting massively attacked, because the malicious elements were just taking advantage of the fact that many companies, even small and medium ones, had to suddenly open their doors to allow people to work from home, not have the time to put the right security measures. And in that hustle to keep the businesses going, probably expecting that many of them compromised on their security, and many of them which were restricting access only inside their buildings and lands and so on and so forth, suddenly had people logging from any part of the country or any part of the world. And I think that's probably what definitely what gave rise to a lot of this. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of our enterprise customers have greatly appreciated. That at that time, we kind of, when they were facing, regardless of the fact that whether they were an Airtel Secure customer or not, we were standing by their side and seeing how we can help them and guide them through such a difficult time. And the other piece I would say is that if you fundamentally have the right essence in an organization, and we do a lot of education of every single person in Airtel on the respect for privacy of information for our customers. And I think that has made a fundamental difference in how every single employee and partner of Airtel thinks. They know it's in their DNA. It is their part of their employment contracts. The data team actually has a slightly separate contract because we entrust them with the most private information of our customers. So they are held to a very different standard than maybe even the rest of the employees that use that. And because we've kind of woven this in our fabric, it is very much a part of every Airtel person's DNA. And I think that over a period of so many years has built that trust layer by layer by layer and really benefited for us. So,
thank you, Harmeen, and a really great point about how values need to be embedded at your very core when you're thinking about responsible business leadership. I'd like to move on to Torod and go back to the second pillar, which is about inclusion. So, you've spoken about diversity being this business imperative. How do you ensure that diversity of thought and experience in your workforce What are the risks of not being diverse?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. I would say two things. So one, the business imperative thing is significant, but I think more importantly, business imperatives are driven by leadership, right? Leadership imperatives. And I think fundamentally, just in terms of the organizational reality, I think across the board, you have to have leadership that is committed to this question before it becomes an operational reality. And again, we are able to pull it through and cascade throughout organizations. Two things I'd say quickly in relation to that question in terms of diversity of thought. One, I think, is understanding how we need to align around the vernacular and how we define, diversity of thought and experience. And for us, it's been a thoughtful discussion around the diversity of orientation, abilities, race, ethnicity, gender, nationalities, socioeconomic. It's a much broader understanding, I think, of what diversity of thought really entails and that commitment to that. So those are the two things I'd say are most significant in my mind. A business imperative is only such if the leadership imperative is there as well. And then having the broadest understanding of what we mean when we talk about diversity of thought, diversity of experience, and the ability, the success at which we're able to do that, I'd say is directly proportionate to the leadership investment in that as a reality, not just the business imperative concept alone.
Jerome, lots of really great points there. We can probably come back to you. I'm sure we'll have some questions around this in the Q&A when we get to it. So finally, I'd like to go back to Michaël again and go back to the third pillar of innovation. So with the Engage 2025 strategic plan, you are staking your claim as an engaged and committed leader. Why have you developed this new strategic plan, and why now?
Well, I believe technology and progress somehow is more and more challenged in our societies, and I believe maybe it's also even more true in France or in some countries in Europe. But I believe this is something we see more and more. People putting into question the meaning of what we do, the meaning of progress, the meaning of technology. And actually, I believe that's not the right approach. I believe that indeed technology you can use it for good reasons, or you can use it for less good reasons and with less good outcomes. But at the end of the day, if we are not able to leverage technology, if we are not able to leverage innovation, we will certainly not be able to reach the societal objectives that we have. When I would just take the example of 5G that I mentioned earlier, we have people in some countries stating that okay, we don't need 5G, we need to move to the low tech to a low tech logic. Why always more data? Why going into that direction? That's why I believe it's important for us, it's important for our industry to take into account those societal expectations, those societal requests. We are sustainable player, we are responsible player, we are here, we have been here for years, we want to be here for the years to come. When designing this new technology, Orange has been almost 10 years ago in the teams that designed 5G. What are the objectives of 5G? We designed and we pushed to have this energy efficiency as a must for 5G. And I believe it's important. That's a message, I would say, both for the society to embrace more technology, because technology can certainly bring answers to this concern, but that's also a message for us, for industry, to take into account this reality, those objectives in the way we design and use technology. And for instance, we are going in a few months to start building 6G, to start thinking about this. I don't want to see, more throughput, more data. Yes, we will be more efficient, but at the end of the day, let's talk also about resilience. Let's talk about energy. Let's talk about not only energy for the network, by the way, but also what can we bring to the device for IoT, for instance, to have long-lasting equipment that we don't have to change every 2 to 3 years, because that's also a big impact in environment. So that's my message, and I think that's why also we do it now. I believe it has never been as urgent to address those topics, and somehow this urgency combined with our DNA was, I think, at the origin of this commitment we are taking and the purpose we have decided to take as a responsible operator.
Thank you, Michaël. It's a very great points that you mentioned there about the responsibility that organisations and leaders have to educate around some of these technologies as well. We only have a few minutes left, but I know we started a little late, but we have had some questions from the audience which I want to cover, and I'm hoping our guests and panelists will help me in trying to answer these quite succinctly so that we can all get back on track. So firstly, I've got a question for Torod. What are Lenovo's plans to build upon their 36% female representation in the business?
So back to the annual report that I talked about, that is our benchmarking, and so that's certainly a big moment for us in terms of public disclosure. But to your question, I think making this a priority beyond HR, so we have two things. One is our annual kind of global organizations HR planning management process, where we are very focused on those data points in relation to our public reporting and the way we look at planning for talent, resources, mobility across the organization, recruitment, retention kinds of issues. And so I think the rigor and discipline that we put into that process that is CEO-led is what I'd say is probably the most significant mechanism or lever we pull to drive this data. And then the back end of that, again, the reporting, that is our public disclosure, both internally and externally, of our progress. That is the way we kind of calibrate or baseline ourselves in a way that's much more authentic and transparent.
Thank you, Torod. Very succinct and very actionable steps that you were taking there. I have one last question from the group. This one's to Harmeen. How is being a trustworthy brand concretely helping your business?
I think it really helps us for two reasons. One is it's helping us build, our churn of our customers is an all-time low, despite, mayhem being in especially the Indian telecom industry over the last few years, where, out of 11 telecoms, only kind of 3.5 have survived and less have disappeared. So it's really helped us strengthen the brand and take it to very new heights. And I think our high-value customers have really stuck with us, and that's it's amazing to see. And I think that is because of the trust in brand, for sure. The other piece is we are a very open telco, and we actually, when we have a fault, we openly talk about it. We, put as part of our open telco initiative, wherever our sites are, whatever the coverage is in your particular area, in your house, everything is there openly for people to see, where we are good, bad, ugly. And I think that has greatly helped build the trust as well. And much more than any time else, this year we ran a massive campaign where we are actually genuinely trying to bring down every single fault in Airtel, which impacts customers in every single part of the organization, bring that down to zero. And I must say, I'm thrilled. We've been running that project both across network and non-network. And in all the other areas, we've managed to bring it down by almost 60% in just this year, and take advantage of really being overly customer obsessed and bringing about a brilliant customer experience. And that has really built up the trust of the brand in a manner that we've never had before.
I mean, thank you for sharing those results. They are very, very impressive. We're going to try and wrap up now. I hope you'll all agree it's been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to wrap up first, though, by going to Michaël and asking you to share just your final thoughts, just in summary of, what you think about this effort to talk about responsible business leadership, and what are your priorities going forward to kind of tackle this topic?
Yeah. Thanks. First, I believe we need to commit, and we need to commit because these society requirements, these societal requirements are a necessity for all sustainable companies. Second topic is we need innovation and we need technology to do that. And third, I would say we need to also be able to be vocal and to participate to the public debate, to bring people and to make them understand and demonstrate them that we use technology for the greater good, which is not always something that is well understood.
Great summary. Lots of great points to take away there. Torod?
I would agree with everything said there. I mean, the overall organizational leadership commitment, I think, is where we have to begin here to affect real change.
Brilliant, very succinct. Thank you so much for helping us tidy this up quickly. And Harmeen, final words, last thought.
I think for me, it is keep the customer in the center and make sure that your policies and everything you do and your commitments all revolve around that. And if you remain true to that fact, I think that's what keeps you in line, both with your commitments and also what are the right promises to make, both to society, to the company, and to the larger world, and of course to your customer as well.
Fantastic. So thank you so very much there. Lots to take away. Commitment. We need leaders to step up. We need innovation, and we need technology underpinning it all. We need to participate in public debate. Customer at the centre, but how we think about how we serve society. So lots of great takeaways. And with that, I'd like to thank all our guests for their participation and their thoughts. It's really very valued. And I'm going to pass back on to Alex Jagano for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Gerry. Thank you for. I'll be very quick. I thought that was a fantastic panel. I'd like to extend the thanks again to the panelists who joined us, to Andrew and to John, who joined us at the beginning. If we go back to the beginning of the event, we talked about the digital declaration being a principle-based initiative. And I think really what you've heard today is that for it to be meaningful and impactful, it needs to be targeted to the needs of each companies. We talked about leadership from the CEO and from the board. Torod mentioned that a number of times, and that's really what was the inspiration behind this movement. So we hope we'll be able to bring to you, in the future and in the new year, further debate and discussion on this topic, bringing other companies who've also joined the digital declaration. I'll just remind you that the report is online on the GSMA website. I think you've got the link here. So please, take a chance to download, to read it, and to share. And we'll continue discussing this topic next year. So thank you very much for joining today, and have a good day.